Okay, so welcome to the part 3 of this stylized 3D character series. In this part I'm going to do the retopology. In the last video I did sculpting and so on, and now I'm going to import my mesh into Blender, and I'm going to start building the new low-res mesh. So first of all I go to File, Import, and import a wavefront.obj. And I'm going to navigate to the high-res sculpt that I exported from Zbrush. I'm going to click import obj, do all the normal things like smooth the mesh and add in a plane. That will be the new retopology. Delete all the vertices on the plane except one, and move it into position, and also enable snapping down there at the bottom of the viewport, and snapping to face, so that the vertices each will snap to the face, the faces of whatever mesh is beneath them. I'm also adding a mirror modifier, disabling the grid, all the normal stuff, pretty straightforward. And immediately you can see here I'm starting to shape around the structure around the eyes, because they're pretty important, of course. So adding in the structure for the top area over there, the eyebrows area. Now of course there are a few tricks that you can use to speed up your retopology. I obviously am doing it manually here, so you can do things like enable shrink wrap, like I'm doing here now, to make more than one vertex stick to the mesh, and you can do things like use the ctrl click key to select rows of verts, and alt click to select whole loops at once, and things like that. And if you want to know more about doing manual retopology, I did make a video of that, and I'll put a link to that video in the description. So if you want a more step-by-step sort of tutorial on how the different tools work, then you can definitely click that link and in the description, and there are a few things in there that I mentioned that are pretty useful for manual retopology. So this is pretty, the rest of this video is pretty straightforward. I'm just getting a nice bunch of edge loops for the retopology on this character. So there are definitely rules that you need to follow when doing especially retopology for animation ready retopology. Things like for animations or games or so on, you've got a few rules to follow, but those rules are not like rigid set in stone. Each character will be different. So this character's got a pretty wide jaw and large features and exaggerated features and so on. So it's not going to be exactly like what it should be, let me say it like that, because I'm not following the rules 100% here. So yeah, each character is going to be different, so you've got to keep that in mind. Just try and find a nice retopology that sort of fits the character, and try and avoid making triangles, of course. So I believe I don't have any triangles, at least not in the important areas like around the mouth and the eyes and so on. You want clean edge loops, no triangles, and places like on the inside of the ears or inside of the nostrils and so on. If you just want to close up a hole, then triangles obviously are fine, because those areas are for the most part never seen, and they also don't deform much. So any area that has a lot of deformations must have very clean, sensible retopology, clean edge loops. Try and keep the quad sizes. By the way, a quad is, if you're not familiar with the term, a quad is just a face with 4 sides. So a tri is a face with 3 sides, a quad is a face with 4 sides, and so on. So yeah, try and keep your quads more or less the same size. It's not always possible. Of course, for places like here, I'm working on the inside of the ear, and you see I do have to use some smaller quads to make them fit, and so on. But try and keep them more or less the same size. Try and keep the loops clean. Don't make any sudden like turns in the loops or things that don't make any sense, try and keep it. I would recommend just googling things like Retopology or Retopology edge flow and just check some of the reference. I'll also include a couple of links in the description to some good reference that helped me a lot. So yeah, it's all about just keeping it as simple as possible and trying to get the loops to make sense. And you have to remember each character is going to be different. The retopology, if you're going to do manual retopology, it's probably going to be different on each character, so don't be afraid to experiment, definitely. Here I'm working on the nose, just doing the structure around the nostrils here. And the mouth area, I remember, was a bit of a challenge on this one. So because the mouth deforms to such a large degree often that the topology around it has to be very, very well thought out. And I'm not sure I did a perfect job with this because as you'll see just a little bit later on in the video here, I do have a bit of trouble getting the loops to make sense. So at this point I wasn't really looking at reference, and I should have looked at better reference here. I think in the end it did work pretty well, but I'm not sure if someone were to animate this that they would have a hard time or a good time of it. I don't know. Often when you're doing retopology like this, you have to work and if it's going to be animated and so on, you have to work together with your animator or your rigging people and just ask for their feedback as you work, because oftentimes I'm not a rigger, so I don't really know what or an animator. I don't know what an animator or a rigger or someone like that really wants. So typically in a production sort of place where you continually updating the models and so on, you want to ask your whoever you're working with, what do they think? What do they think should change? Is there anything that they want to improve? Like the rigging artists, especially the guys who do the technical artists, right? They their advice is gold when working on topology like this. So definitely, if you're working in a production or if you're working on a team of some sort, always ask for feedback from your technical guys. So here just adding in the loops for the mouth, the lips. You'll notice that the sculpt is not symmetrical, and I did this because I knew that I wasn't really going to pose it or anything, so I just made it asymmetrical. Generally it's probably better to keep it symmetrical and then just make it asymmetrical after you've rigged it. So but it's not a big deal in this case. I'll just quickly move the verts into position after I've done the main topology and so on. So it's not a big deal here. Just keep in mind that if it's going to be animated, if it's going to be rigged, you want to keep it perfectly symmetrical, or as symmetrical as possible. Just try and keep the expressions and so on, keep the expression very neutral right up until you rigged it. Then you could start doing expressions and so on with shape keys and stuff like that. So obviously you get characters that are by nature not very symmetrical, like if it's some kind of monster or something, then it's, the workflow would be to keep it as symmetrical as possible until and keep the expression neutral until you've rigged it. If it's a character like this where the face is pretty symmetrical, or it can remain pretty symmetrical, you want to keep it that way until you do the rigging, basically. So this was just like a still render, so that's the reason I didn't really bother with keeping any of the rigging rules in mind. The topology, I like to think the topology is pretty rigging friendly, but I really have not much to say about that. I would rather ask someone who does actual rigging what they think about it and if they would like to change anything. So notice how I make the rows less. I basically combine 3 verts in a row, into one little, I merge them into one vert and create these diamond shapes. You might need to slow down the video to see what I did there, but that's a very effective way of reducing the number of rows and still keeping your quads and so on. So you got to be careful where you do that. You can't just do that like in the middle of an of an area that does deforming and so on, but it's something that you can do in places like under the chin there and on the forehead and places that are either not very visible or don't deform much. So you can create these diamond shapes, and they then have less rows that you have to worry about, and therefore less dense geometry. So just quickly filling in the top of the skull here, and at this point I'm really not concerned about the topology too much, because the skull is a rigid thing. It doesn't deform much at all, and it's going to be hidden by hair, and yeah, don't have to worry about it. Just fill it in as fast as possible. And again, if you want to know what kind of tricks I use to fill out this geometry and what shortcuts I use and so on, again, there's a video in the description that goes into detail about that. So I'm just testing a few loops by holding down Alt and right clicking on a bunch of faces, and now I'm starting to move the asymmetrical verts into position. Really fast, really simple, just using proportional editing here and there just to stretch it into place. So normally this wouldn't be necessary, but in this case I sculpted it this way, so now I have to move it into position. But it's no big deal, it's really fast. It's just mainly the eyes and the nose and the corner of the mouth here that are just need a little bit of tweaking. Okay, so that's almost done. Just creating a bit of space here in the topology. Adding a subsurface modifier here so I can kind of get the mesh to have more detail, a little bit more detail. Also adding creasing on the eyes here to get them just a little bit sharper. Depending on your mesh, it might not be necessary to do that. I generally like to do it on more stylized characters, like to crease around the eyes especially, like just to get that nice crisp edge. Okay, so now it's time for UV unwrapping. So what I've got here is now just a mesh with subdivision surface and shrink wrap modifiers still, and the mirror modifier obviously has been applied for so that I could have those asymmetrical details in there as well. So now I'm just selecting a bunch of edges here, starting around the ears. Selecting edges using ctrl and right click and just selecting them there, and then pressing ctrl E and marking the seams there. So making seam under the chin, around the ears, down the back of the skull. And these are generally the sort of seams that you lay down for a typical face. So you'll notice I also have one around the nose there. Now I'm switching to the UV editing mode and pressed U in the viewport and pressed unwrap on the menu. So now I have a bunch of islands here and everything looks more or less like it's working. I'm scaling up the main face UV island and scaling down the neck. Generally I like to give the face UVs a little bit more space. Here I'm adding a UV test grid to see what the texture looks like when it's on the model. This is just to test whether there's any stretching or so on the model. So I'm adding a material with a basic image texture, and then as the image I'm selecting the test UV texture, and now in textured mode I can see exactly where there's a bit of stretching. So for example, here on the ears you can see there's a little bit of stretching, so what I'll do is I'll just go in the UV editing mode and just make the ear UVs a little bit larger, and also move them into better positions. As far as possible, I like to keep the UV islands more or less in positions where they make a little bit of sense, just in case I need to edit them in a 2D editing app like Photoshop or Krita or so on. Then if they are laid out so that they make a little bit of sense, it's so much easier. So you can see I've got the nose in the middle, I've got the neck sort of symmetrically laid out, and so on. So that's looking a lot better. The stretching is still a little bit there, but it's not too bad, it's quite acceptable. So this is now done UV unwrapping and ready for baking and texturing. So in the next video I'm going to look at those things. We're going to start by baking the normal maps and then painting the base diffuse textures, and after that we'll continue with other things like specular maps and bump maps and pores and things like that. So that's all in the follow-up texturing videos. So thanks for watching this one. It's really just a quick video to show what I did with the retopology, and yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video where I begin with texturing. So thanks for watching.